So I'm here to talk about reinvention, but before I do, I want to ask who we have here in the audience and also tell you the story of how I got to reinvention. So how many of you are in the startup world? You are either in startup or in funding, so good 2/3. And how many of you are in corporations, established corporations? Also a good 2/3. So I assume most of you are in corporations and startups. That's a good start. How many of you are in academia? Academia, so in school or teaching, good. And media, good. And consulting of some sort, good. So it's a combination of different things. This helps me a lot because I often speak about this topic to corporations, but I want to make sure that this becomes also relevant for you personally. So why we need to reinvent, actually more specifically why you must reinvent every 3.5 years or even more often. Before I say anything about the why, few words of how I got to this topic. I am a recovering academic. The way recovering alcoholics are recovering alcoholics, so I'm a recovering academic. I had a career in academia, all kind of teaching and writing, until my students cornered me and said, it's time for you to prove that whatever you're preaching at different places and stages actually works. So I went working for a business, and one of the biggest stories that I'm part of right now, I'm a chief transformation officer for 75,000 people mining and metals company. So it's as real as it gets. From academia, it gets very real. But occasionally I get relapses. The way alcoholics get relapses, I also get relapses. So recently I had that relapse, and it had to do with trying to figure out from research perspective why the companies I work with get into trouble they get. And they get into trouble, you all know the life cycle of a company. They get into trouble because most of them get to the place of maturity and they get extremely, extremely comfortable and then start sliding down. And this is my question, why so many of them are sliding down, and how can we get out of the slide before it's too late? How do we start reinventing before it's too late? I ask this question from research perspective because the company I worked with really got into this too late. So every kind of scandal, every kind of problem, every kind of bankruptcy threat, this was on our hands. And the question was, can we prevent that in the future? What can we do to prevent that in the future? And the research shows quite clearly what do you do to prevent it in the future. You reinvent. You start the new cycle before it's too late, and you will notice very clearly you start the new cycle before you even get to the prime. And imagine that you are either in your startup. In startup world, this would be not reinvention. The closest term would be pivot. So you're in a startup area or you're in your corporations and you come to your business and you say, it's time to reinvent. It's good to see familiar faces in the room. So it's time to reinvent, and you come to them right here and say, okay, let's reinvent. Let's do a completely different business model. What will your people sell to you? You're just coming up. You've been fighting to get to some level of the top. And before you reach the top, you come to your employees, you come to your team and say, okay, let's change things around. Let's do something else. What will they tell you? You're crazy, yeah. In the startup world, it's a little bit easier because pivoting is made into a kind of must. In the corporate world, the normal reaction is, are you smoking something? Are you guys up there in XCOM, have nothing to do, you have no reality check? So this is a very, very honest place where you have to reinvent, and at the same time, your entire company is against you. And we tend to think that we are excited about change. Of course, most of the time we are not. So the question becomes, how do we get out of this? We have a lot of good stories that show how, right? So there are companies that have done this very successfully. So it feels like we know how to reinvent. We know how to pivot, whether we are a developed and mature company or we're a new one. Philips, for example, couldn't make it as a TV producer, reinvented as a medical supplier. Pretty much doing the same thing, using the screens to show X-rays and CAT scans and everything else. Hydria, one of my favorite Slovenian examples, went from heating and cooling to auto parts manufacturing. You all know the Skype story. They were a really file-sharing company that decided, okay, it would be easier if we communicated without paying the big telecom companies while we're developing the file share startup. How about we also share in terms of talking face-to-face, and that's how they developed original Skype. The reCAPTCHA, the tiny story most of you know, took the capture, the traditional software that helps us recognize a human being from a robot and make sure that it's not a robot that is trying to log in. The reCAPTCHA idea was very simple. Can we, instead of wasting the time that people spend filling out the googly words to prove they're humans, can we harvest that time and show people books that need to be digitized? So every time you're using reCAPTCHA, you're actually for free digitizing a whole bunch of books for Google. We have those stories, right? We see those stories. There are companies, old and new, that are reinventing successfully. BMW right now has one of the best venture capital funds in Europe that I know, developing all kinds of new startups related to mobility, related to parking, related to car sharing, because they realize that they don't sell cars, they sell movement. So how can we sell movement better? But the reality check is that absolute majority of companies are not on that list. Absolute majority of companies on this list. And yes, we have the poster children, the Kodak and Nokia, but it's not the exception. Absolute majority of companies, if you look at the original Fortune 500 list, for example, 89% of those companies is either gone or acquired. In essence, they died. Their business model did not survive. So even the best and the brightest, the Fortune lists, are not surviving, let alone the numbers for the startup community are even more staggering. So the question for us becomes, how do we prevent this? How do we learn to reinvent and embed reinvention into everything we do every day, every year, in every industry, and also at the personal level? How do we reinvent ourselves often enough so that we don't end up on a list of 89%? I looked at the data. I was trying to figure out what is that makes a difference. And as always, most of the answers are mindset. So the mindset discovery for me had to do with time, with history. The traditional cycle, from the beginning, the startup years, the growth, the maturity, and death, the traditional cycle for most of the history of the capitalism, our recent business history, the last 200 years or so, the traditional cycle on average was 75 years. That meant that you would graduate from college, enter a company, grow into that company, retire from that company without ever once going through major reinvention. You simply would not even know what it is. That's why we had a huge number of people preparing for a management job and almost nobody preparing for leadership or change job. We didn't even have terms for change management until 90s. We didn't even come up with the discipline until 90s. So 75 years, that means you need to reinvent about every 30 to 40 years. Then comes the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the start of globalization, the dissolution of socialist bloc, and dot-com era combined with that. So 1989 to about 2000, 2002, the new era, the cycle shifts from 75 years to 15 years. Now, instead of reinventing every 40 years or every 37 years, you're reinventing every 7.5 years. And if that is not enough, in the recent 10 years, that cycle went even shorter. So today, the average life cycle of a company is about 7 years. And what I'm talking about here is not a product, it's a business model life cycle. In our business in mining, we produce the same exact aluminum brick as we did 60 years ago. It's the same plant. So the physical 19-kilo aluminum brick chemically is exact same as it was 60 years ago. But we cannot make money on it anymore. We need to reinvent the business model that will allow us to produce this brick. So today, instead of being a mining and metals company, we are becoming a service company. And we are producing services for a whole bunch of different industries so that we can still make money on that aluminum brick. We have to figure out a different business model. But this cycle means, the 7-year cycle means, that today we have to reinvent every 3.5 years on average. And I'm sure in your industries it differs. The longest cycle I've seen in the most capital-inclusive and capital-intensive industries, including my own, when the mining is 45 years, the life of a mine, even there, the longest cycle for a business model is 10 years. That's it. After 10 years, on average, you cannot make money on that business model anymore. You need to reinvent the business model. But I'm sure you know the industries where it's not 10 years, where it's not even 5 years. Telecom industry, this industry cycle today is about 1 year. Every year, you have to reinvent your business model. You see that. New technology comes up, the previous model is obsolete. You cannot make money on it anymore. There are industries where the cycle is around 3 years. That means you're reinventing every year and a half. That is the speed we haven't seen before. So it's a mindset shift. Most of us grew up in this mindset. Looking at your faces, some of you were probably born in this mindset. But you are taught by people who are still living in the years as if you have time. We still have in our school courses and educational models that prepare us for long, long life cycles, that prepare us for one right answer, that prepare us for one black and one white. Today, if you think about the school curriculum, absolute majority of courses, if you have kids or if you have nephews or younger brothers and sisters, most of the courses are preparing you for this. Any of you had a change in agility course in your school, in middle school, high school? How about change in agility course in university? Anybody majored in change? There's one person. Two. There are two rare ones, so these are the ones that you want to hire. There are two people who had change in agility course in university. We just don't teach that. But that seems to be the only thing that makes the difference today. Everything else is coming and going. It's about applying and being able to deal with change in agility. What does it mean for you? If you are in startup world, what it means is that you need to start analyzing the cycles of the industries to know which industries are not reinventing themselves, so that you have a space, an opportunity for innovation, an opportunity to enter the market where there is a potential gap. So if you see the industry that is beginning the decline and is not reinventing, this is a good place to enter with a new product or service. Why is it a good place? Because statistically, there's only about 10% chance once the company started sliding down, so if the revenues are in decline, for that company, there's only 10% chance that it will recover. That's pretty much a doomed story. That is an opportunity for you. If there's a company that is getting ready for decline and doesn't even know it, neither Nokia nor Kodak knew it. From the top of their position to the complete death, it was about 12 months. So they really didn't know they're dying. For you, this is a place where start searching for opportunity. Which companies, which industries are not reinventing themselves fast enough so that you can grab that space in the market? If you're in mature business, if you're in academia or media, what it means for you is that you need to start building your companies ready to reinvent. Remember in the 90s, we had this massive, wonderful book called Built to Last? It was a classic. Oh, there's one person who said yes, yes, good. That's good that you don't read those books anymore. So 80s and 90s, the whole story in the academic world and in the book publishing businesses, how do we stay there? And by the way, some of those stories featured companies that collapsed magnificently, such as Enron. So build to last is really absolute. Today, it's about build to reinvent. What kind of people do we need? What kind of functions do we need? What kind of processes do we need? What kind of business model do we need that we're able to reinvent before it's too late? And there's really not many industries that do that very well. Fashion industry does that every season because that's built into the idea of doing the collection. But other than fashion industry, I don't know any industry that routinely, every 6 months, reinvents its entire product line. And it's built into the process and everything revolves and the finances are revolved around that. So number one, if you are in a startup world, analyze the industries, find your gap as an opportunity space. Number two, if you're in corporation or in academia, prepare for reinvention, build a reinvention into the essence of who you are. But the most important lesson is really for me personally. So as I went on this journey, the biggest discovery was for me personally, and I would like to share 3 lessons for you personally. So number one, what does this speed of reinvention means for us personally? Number one is that we tend to obsess with change. change management, skills of transformation and change are all around, and this is what we research, we teach, we practice, we preach, we read, and everything. The issue is, however, with reinvention is not change, it's continuity. When you change that fast, what stays? What is unchangeable? What is that is essence of you that you are not ready to compromise? So reinvention speed means as much for continuity management as it is for change management. It's actually more dangerous in terms of continuity. It's very easy to decrease, develop, destroy something that is actually the essence of who you are. Don't forget about continuity management as much as you do change management. The second lesson has to do with how we deal with change in reinvention. And that is what I call 90-second rule. Most of you are here because you're the kind of people who like change. How many of you like change? Yeah, look around. Yeah, you wouldn't be at PODIM conference if you wouldn't like change. You are a very rare breed. You are about 1 to 5% of a typical population. But even for you, biologically, even if you like change, biologically, you do not have a wiring to like change. Because biologically, we have only two options of how to react to change. And those two options come from your biology class in high school. So if I'm walking through the woods of Maribor 10,000 years ago, and I hear a loud crack, that's change coming. That's something happening on the market. So I'm going through the woods, big, big crack. What are my options? What are my two responses that I have wired into my biology? Yeah, absolutely. Runaway is one. That's the flight syndrome. And if I don't wanna, and the second syndrome is fight syndrome, absolutely. So these are my two options. My two options, either I fight the change or I run away from the change. Notice neither of those options say, hooray, finally, it's here, let's go. Yeah, biologically, the only thing my body knows to do with any kind of change, including positive change, getting a job I want, getting a project or a client I've been chasing, married to a person I actually want to get married to, having a baby I actually want to have babies to, even positive change, I still have two responses. Either I fight or I run away. Biologically, what it means is that my blood pressure goes up. It goes up so that my blood reaches my muscles so I can physically fight or run away. It means that blood goes away from my brain. Yeah? It means that I have emotions that are very strong but not very positive. And generally speaking, any kind of change, the normal, healthy reaction is being very upset. You, of course, in most businesses do not have an option of running away, so the way people run away is that they run away here. They're sitting in front of you, but they're not there. Or they fight with you directly. These are the two options you see. And the bad news is that we have no choice over it. This is our normal, natural, biological reaction. If you are happy about change, something is biologically not well with you. Yeah? And this is what I say to every company I work with, including my own. If you're introducing change and people are either quiet or they're kind of pretending to be happy, they're not in good shape. If they're very angry, upset, great. You have healthy people, good immune response, excellent. That's bad news. We have no choice. But the good news is that that biological response on average in a normal human being runs about 90 seconds. From the moment the adrenaline and cortisol hits your blood to the moment it cleans out through your kidneys is about 90 seconds, that's all. After that, we have a choice. The first 90 seconds, we have no choice. After that, we have the choice. Unfortunately, what most of us choose after the 90 seconds is to start a new cycle, and a new cycle, and a new cycle. I know whole countries who've been in a 90-second cycle for the last 90 years. Still upset about something that happened 90 years ago, and they just, in the media, in the public conversation, start a new cycle, and a new cycle, and a new cycle. The good news, and that is where you come in as people who love change, you have something to do after the first 90 seconds. Give those 90 seconds to your people to be very upset, because that's the only way they will be able to reinvent with you honestly. But then take charge after the 90 seconds, because we have a choice. And the final personal lessons on the speed and reinvention. We have talked for most of our 100 years of education. We had public education only about 100 years, 120 in some countries. Most of public education, most of our media, most of our brimming is really worshiping IQ. The more rational intelligence you have, the better. In the 90s, we started paying attention to EQ, emotional intelligence. Are you able to use your emotions as a resource? Then we started using PQ, political intelligence. Are you able to use power as a resource? What is required today for reinvention to happen is XQ. Are you able to use change as a resource intelligently? And this is one thing where I truly believe our investment has to go. We have to develop intelligent use of change. The kind of intelligent use we haven't seen much, neither in our education nor in our businesses. So with that, I wish you a lot of good luck with reinvention. Don't forget that you do not have time, and I thank you very much.